Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday Talk. Just a quick reminder that this Thursday we do not have any music. We will be getting together via Zoom. So if you don't have that information, email me or email Carrie to get that Zoom info for you. So we'll eat lunch together virtually. But today we have a really interesting talk about the Museum of Southern Jewish Experience, which was supposed to open this year, 2020, and now is hopefully opening at some point in 2021. We have the museum's executive director, Kenneth Hoffman, here. So take it away, Kenneth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Thanks for inviting me to be here and talk to this group, Tuesday Talks. I love that name, very alliterative. What I want to do today is, I was told I had 3 hours, so I hope that's no, I'm just kidding. Just going to take a few minutes really to tell you a little bit about the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, a little bit about its history, what we're hoping to do with the museum, show you some pictures of what we're putting together, and then give you some opportunities to participate, how you can be part of this museum. So we'll start out, I'll share my screen and I will show a PowerPoint. Yay, PowerPoint. All right, so because I can't see you, I can't really ask you questions and see your answers, but I hope you can see my screen and you can see our tagline, which is Shalom, make yourself at home. This is real important to us, that the museum be a very welcoming place, not just for Jews, not just for Southerners, but for anybody. And we're mixing right there, Jewish and the South. Shalom, welcome, peace, make yourself at home, the kind of hospitality that we like to proffer here in the South. So shalom, make yourself at home. This is your museum, and I hope that you enjoy learning about it today. I do want to start out with a few questions, because I used to be the director of education at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And so I spent a lot of time asking questions of students and adults. So this is going to be for the adults because it's a pub quiz. So I have 3 questions about Southern Jewish history. Since we're not all in the same room, you can just answer them to yourself. So the first question is, which city had the first synagogue outside of the original 13 colonies? Was it Charleston, Mobile, or New Orleans? So shout out your answer to the world. And the answer is New Orleans, right here where I am. It was in 1828 was the first. Now, Charleston has a much older congregation, but of course, Charleston was in the original 13 colonies. Question 2, which sweet treats trace their kosher roots back to Savannah, Georgia? Was it Girl Scout cookies, Goo Goo clusters, or pecan pralines? All right, what do you think the answer is? The answer is Girl Scout cookies. Girl Scouts were founded in Savannah, Georgia. And when they started selling cookies as fundraisers, they went to the best bakery in town, which was Gottlieb's. Gottlieb's was a kosher bakery. And so Girl Scout cookies were kosher. And to this day, they do their best to ensure that all new varieties also are kosher. And our third and last question, which African-American musician was taken in by a Jewish family at age, let's see what I'm covering up with my face, at age 7 and given his first instrument? Was it Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, or Buddy Bolden? And the answer is Louis Armstrong, taken in by the Karnofskys, who took care of him and fed him and lent him money for his first cornet. And throughout the rest of Louis Armstrong's life, he wore a Jewish star around his neck. And that was in memory of the Karnofskys and the kindness that they showed him growing up. So just 3 fun questions about Jews in the South. What is the South? The South is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For my museum, for your museum, the South is the following 13 states: Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, the great state of Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, which is, of course, the home of the museum in New Orleans. But you may have some familiarity with this museum, and you may be asking yourself, wait a minute, is this a new museum? Because it seems like I've heard of this before. The original site of the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience was in Utica, Mississippi, at a Jewish summer camp. It's called Henry S. Jacobs Camp. And back in the 1980s, the camp director kept getting contacted by people from small towns around Mississippi and Louisiana and Arkansas and even in Tennessee. And the people would say, we're the last Jewish family in Dumas, Arkansas, or we're the last Jewish family in Krotz Springs, Louisiana. We're selling the old synagogue building. What do we do with the Torahs? What do we do with this or that? Or my grandfather just died, and I went up in the attic and I found all these ledger books from his old dry goods store. What should I do with these? So at the camp, they decided to become a repository for all these artifacts of what was then a sort of a disappearing lifestyle of small town Southern Jews. And they wound up making a museum called the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. And it was a great place for the summer campers to learn about their history and their heritage. It happened to be one of 2 air-conditioned buildings at the camp at the time. So in the Mississippi summer, you can imagine, it was a popular destination. However, it was not easy for the general public to get to and visit. So eventually in 2012, they closed the museum. They took all of the artifacts and they put them in storage, and they set about looking for a new home for the museum. And they looked in various cities and they settled on New Orleans. New Orleans has a very old and rich Jewish history. New Orleans has a very vibrant tourism economy. New Orleans has Tulane University. Tulane happens to have the 3rd highest percentage of Jewish students of any university in the country. They have about 36 or 37% of Tulane's student population is Jewish. So we use maybe isn't the right word. We employ, because we actually do pay them, Tulane students as interns from their Jewish studies department. And we're looking forward to all kinds of partnerships with Tulane moving forward. So next slide. Okay, so here's some fun. Henry S. Jacobs Camp. I have a lot of experience with Henry S. Jacobs Camp because I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and every summer I was a camper at Henry S. Jacobs Camp. And when I was in college, I was even a counselor on the staff there, and I was kind of a goofball, and I had hair. Those were the good old days. But because I knew the camp, because I was working in museums, I was working at the World War II Museum, as I said, when they decided to come to New Orleans, they looked me up and they said, we need somebody to help get this place open in New Orleans. So they hired me. They took a huge risk, and they hired me. So far, it's working out pretty well. This is a picture of the museum building at the camp. So it's no longer a museum. Now it's the camp uses it for something else. And the museum had morphed, had grown into the Institute of Southern Jewish Life in the year 2000. And the Institute is still around. They're in Jackson, Mississippi. And the Institute does great things like sends out student rabbis to little communities that don't have rabbis. And they train religious school teachers in communities that maybe don't have a professional Jewish educator. And they ran the museum. But since we've moved to New Orleans, we've separated from ISJL, and we're our own thing. We're our own nonprofit with our own board, incorporated in Louisiana. We're still very good friends with the folks at ISJL, and we do some programming together. But this is our new building in New Orleans. We don't have the whole building. I wish we had the whole building. We are renting, we have a 15-year lease on part of the building, the ground floor and half of the second floor. And over the next year, since they've just rehabbed the building, over the next year, we still have the option of taking half of the third floor. And it's territory that I really crave. However, it'll raise the rent. And so we have to make sure that we are fiscally responsible. So we're not taking it yet. However, if you should happen to know someone who would love to see their name on a floor of the museum where we're doing educational programming, you know, give me a buzz. I'll give you my numbers later. I don't know if you've ever been to New Orleans. I was up on the roof the other day of our building and I took this picture. So this is where we are. We're very close to the Mississippi River. You can see the bridge. We're close to where I used to work, the National World War II Museum. But in this neighborhood are other museums. The Ogden Museum of Southern Art, the Contemporary Art Center. So it's a really wonderful neighborhood to be in. New Orleans has a very historic old streetcar line, and we're right on the streetcar line. So we're accessible to tourists and locals alike, which is something that when the museum moved to New Orleans, that was really something they were looking for, was to get, we're expecting 30,000 people a year. This was pre-COVID. So let's hope things settle down so that we can get our 30,000 people a year coming to the museum. The building was originally built over 100 years ago. So when we did the renovations, we did our best to maintain the original brick, the original exposed beams in the ceiling. So when you come through, the building itself has a very historic feel. As you wind your way through the history of Southern Jews, you're actually, you know, in an old building that lends itself really well to a museum. All right, this is the boring slide, but this is our footprint on the ground floor where most of our exhibits are, and I'm just going to walk you through it very briefly because I know it's hard. You're not going to be able to read it; it's too small to read probably. But you walk in, you buy your ticket, you see all of the founders. You know how museums have those founders walls. So this is where that would be. Then you immediately go into a theater and watch a short film that we're making right now. It's about 7 minutes right now. It might wind up being 8 minutes. I'm not sure. And the film gives you a sense of what is the Southern Jewish experience, what should you be preparing yourself to see in this exhibit, and asks some questions about identity and diversity and your feelings about those things. Next is Gallery 1. This is a chronological gallery. It's the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, mostly the 19th century. But it does start out by talking about some of the early Sephardic Jewish immigrants who came to places like Savannah and Charleston and New Orleans and Mobile and Norfolk. And then it starts to talk about the other waves of immigration, the Ashkenazic that came in the middle of the 19th century, and the Eastern European Jews who came toward the end of the 19th century. We talk about in this gallery race and slavery and the Civil War and the Jewish interactions with race. Some of that history is not very comfortable to talk about, but it's important because you want to tell a full story so that you can celebrate the things you're proud of and you can learn from the things that you're not as proud of. In this gallery, we talk about peddlers and merchants. A majority of Jewish immigrants and then the first and second generations after were merchants, petty merchants. Now, some of them wound up running giant department stores like Neiman Marcus eventually, but a lot of them started out very small. In this gallery, we also talk about Jewish acceptance in the southern communities they were in. We have a great map showing where all the cities are that have elected Jews as mayors, and there's almost 200 cities and towns that have in the South who have elected Jews as mayors. Some of them multiple. So, and I don't have all the information in my head, so I don't know if Nashville has had Jewish mayors or not. I could look it up. But some places like Galveston, Texas, have elected 5 Jewish mayors. And Donaldsonville, Louisiana, a little town, has elected 5 Jewish mayors over the years. So, so it's great to see that kind of acceptance of Jews in the South. At the same time, we also investigate some of the anti-Semitism that was around. And we talk about Leo Frank, the young man who was convicted of murdering a young girl in Atlanta in 1913, and then was lynched by an angry mob. So that's what we cover in Gallery 1. Gallery 2 is probably my favorite gallery. It's called Foundations of Judaism. And it talks about, it's not chronological, it's thematic. It's a Judaism 101 gallery. And this is for our non-Jewish visitors, although I think our Jewish visitors are going to love it too. This is where we talk about what is Judaism? What are the values? What are the beliefs? What are the holidays? What are the life cycle events? You know, a lot of people will say, yeah, my workmate, his son had a bar mitzvah and they invited me, and what is that? Or, yeah, so-and-so's out today, it's Rosh Hashanah. I've heard of that, but what is that? You know, so in this gallery, they'll get a chance to learn what these things are. And all of the artifacts, of course, in here, all the Judaica, the Seder plates and the menorahs and the Torahs themselves, they're all from Southern people in Southern communities. So we're excited to be able to present these beautiful and meaningful objects and really explore and teach people who maybe don't know what Jews are. Now, the third gallery is the 20th century and beyond. Here we talk about the Holocaust. We're not a Holocaust museum, but we have a gallery that talks about how Jews in the South reacted to the Holocaust, what they saw in the Southern newspapers about the Holocaust, how they made efforts to get family members out of Europe. We have letters to senators and to the State Department and affidavits saying, I will take care of these people if they will get visas to get out. And of course, many of those stories ended happily with people getting out. Many of those stories, more so actually, ended sadly with people not getting out. But the Southern Jewish experience isn't all 19th century peddlers. These Jews who survived the Holocaust and came to the South to make new lives for themselves are a very important part of the Southern Jewish experience. Those people added to our communities for years and years, and in their later years did the most important thing of all, or many of them did, which is many of them started going into schools. and sharing their experiences with young people, which is so important. And so our Holocaust Gallery talks about what Holocaust survivors have added to our communities. We talk about the civil rights movement and Jewish involvement and lack of involvement in the civil rights movement, because there were a lot of different responses, Jewish responses to the civil rights movement. There were those who stood up for civil rights. There were those who were segregationists. And then the majority of people were mostly like, shh, don't make waves. We're already, the KKK has already bombed the rabbi's house. We don't need trouble. Just keep your head down, keep quiet. So there were a lot of different responses, and we talk about that. And finally, then we take it up to the present and we give people a chance to explore the Jewish history of their own state. And I'll show you that in just a minute. And then you exit through the gift shop, of course, and you buy your book and your coffee mug that says, Shalom, make yourself at home. So here's a few renderings of what the exhibits are going to sort of look like. This is our theater, multimedia theater. This is our From Immigrants to Southerners gallery, where this is gallery 1. We have some great timelines in our, besides having the artifacts, we have great images and of course text that explains things. So our timeline sort of takes you through some of the important aspects of Southern Jewish life. Our peddlers and merchants, we have a great peddler's cart that you can see on the left. And things like, cash registers and pictures of storekeepers standing proudly in front of their establishments. And we have a great collection of postcards of Jewish-owned department stores, because a lot of these folks who started with the small dry goods store wound up expanding into something much bigger, like Riches in Atlanta, or Neiman Marcus, Saks, Bon Marché, places like that, Levy Brothers. So we talk about that experience. Here's some of the stuff I mentioned about race and the Civil War. So Jews did own slaves. And some Jews were slave traders even. And the $2 bill you see there is a Confederate $2 bill, and that is Judah P. Benjamin, the Jewish senator from Louisiana. After Louisiana seceded, he became eventually the Secretary of State for the Confederacy, and he was known as the brains of the Confederacy, and they put him on a $2 bill. And these are more difficult. This is what's known as difficult history, history that some people want to just ignore and forget, but you can't do that. History doesn't go away. It's always there. And so it's better to present it in a responsible way so that people can engage in conversation and engage in exploration and learn about their past and move forward with that knowledge. This is gallery 2. It's not really going to look exactly like this. We've changed it somewhat since the exhibit designers made this rendering, but it's going to be beautiful. The things hanging from the ceiling there are going to be reproductions of stained glass windows from over 50 synagogues across the South. So that's going to be really nice. Gallery 3, the 20th century and beyond. This is the very entrance to that gallery. And one of the first things we talk about is Zionism at the turn of the century. It was a relatively new idea, this political Zionism, that there should be a state of Israel, a Jewish homeland. And in the South, there was a lot of pushback against that, because in the South, Jews were a much smaller percentage of the population than in places like the Northeast. So Jews, even though they were fitting in, there was always that that ambiguity, that have we really been accepted here as members of the community and as good Tennesseans or good Americans? And now there was fear that, well, what if we get accused of not being good Americans because we're really Israelis? And so there was a lot of pushback against Zionism, but at the same time, there were Southern Jews who were ardent Zionists. Here in New Orleans, Rabbi Max Heller at the turn of the century was an ardent Zionist. And he, even though his congregation wasn't, didn't really agree with him, he was like, so what? This is the right thing. Nowadays, the idea, almost all Jews are in favor of Israel. So, but this was a historical time. And so we explore that. These are some of this is the New Americans Club in New Orleans. So these are the Holocaust survivors who made their own social club when they got here. And so we have a couple of these pictures, and we have images of Holocaust survivors from every state, all 13 of our states. And here's, this is our kiosk of oral histories, where you can learn about, you can listen to the voices of what it was like to come to and live in the South after surviving the Holocaust. Civil rights and activism. I mentioned the rabbi's house getting bombed. The man on the left is Rabbi Perry Nussbaum of Jackson, Mississippi. His synagogue and his house were dynamited by the KKK. So those who were afraid to speak out, there was real cause for that fear. Even so, there were still those that did not stand aside and spoke up for civil rights. The museum started by talking about, when it was in Mississippi, talking about the disappearing small towns. So we've expanded what the museum does now. We're not just talking about small towns, but we do talk about how things changed over time. The third generation of immigrants, or the third generation of Southern Jews, and the fourth generation start going away to college. And they go to Vanderbilt, and they go to Tulane, and they go to Emory, and they go to Rhodes and LSU and all these other, and they get a degree. And then they turn around and they look back at Donaldsonville, Louisiana, or Bristol, Tennessee, or wherever, and at Dad's dry goods store, and they think, you know what, that's not the life for me. There are very few Jewish people there for me to date. And so they move. But what's interesting is that they almost exclusively, particularly in the early part of the century, of the 20th century, through the mid part, they stay in the South. But they move to Nashville and Memphis and Atlanta and Houston and Dallas and Charlotte. So today there are more Jews in the South than there have ever been before. They just happen to be in these big population centers and not in the small towns. So we talk a little bit about transforming. The bagel in the middle is a Mardi Gras throw. A throw is something at Mardi Gras, when the parades go by, they throw stuff, beads and things like that to the crowd. And Jews originally weren't allowed in these Mardi Gras clubs, which are called crews. So, but today there are two Jewish Mardi Gras marching crews. I mean, Mardi Gras is a Catholic holiday, right, or a Christian holiday, but talk about the Southern Jewish experience. The Crew de Jew paints these bagel. That's a real bagel, and they paint them gold, and they decorate them, and then they lacquer them up so that they won't, I guess, rot or whatever a bagel might do. And they throw them to the crowd, and it's a real big, a great deal if you get a bagel from Crew de Jew. And we talk about how popular culture has, how people have learned about Jews in the South through popular culture, things like Driving Miss Daisy, or reading books like A Confederacy of Dunces, which have Jewish characters in them, even though those are farcical characters. Now, here's where you can learn more about Tennessee or any state. When you sit down at one of these monitors and you start pushing the touch screens and you choose the state you want to explore, you learn about some of the artifacts we have in our collection that aren't on exhibit, and you learn about some of the stories and some of the people from those states. It's a lot of fun. And you can even access the Encyclopedia of Southern Jewish Communities, which goes into more depth about different communities. And so if you push Tennessee, these are the different cities that you can explore if you feel like sitting down and reading something that's a little more meaty and a little longer. Finally, we have a final activity. It's called Stitching Together Our Communities, and it's based on this quilt, which is on display in our first gallery. And this is a quilt that was made by the Jewish Ladies Sewing Circle in Canton, Mississippi. In 1885, they made it to auction off to raise money to build a synagogue. So it's a wonderful metaphor. The community comes together, they work hard, they create something beautiful. So that's the way a community is supposed to work. So we've shown people this quilt. The last thing they do is they sit down at this table and they create their own quilt square. They're not going to poke their fingers with any needles because it's all electronic on a touch screen. They pick a square, they pick the fabrics they want on there, they add the patches that represent them, a Jewish star, a cross, a soccer ball, whatever it is a cat, a dog, whatever it is that represents them as an individual, they create a square, and then they electronically move it into the middle of the table, and their square gets added to everyone else's square. And it creates this beautiful, unique, diverse quilt. So the symbolism is unmistakable, that the more diversity you have, the more beautiful, the more crazy, the more wonderful the outcome is. And you can email your square to your family and friends and say, I'm at the museum and look what I'm making and learning about. So it's very exciting. Our second floor has a special exhibit gallery that will change exhibits every few months. It has a classroom, of course, because you have to have a classroom for education, and it has our offices. We have one of the prettiest things in the museum is going to be our Mezzah Society wall. The Mezzah Society is a giving level that if people are in the Mezzah Society, we send them a hand-blown glass mezuzah made here in New Orleans, and we ask them to send us a mezuzah of their liking. It can be a new one, it can be an old one. They don't have to do it, obviously. And we're going to put that up on a wall in an installation exhibit, and there's going to be hundreds of these mezuzot, and people can dedicate their mezuzah to family or to their community or to whoever they want, and it's going to stand as a symbol of their commitment to the idea of exploring and presenting Southern Jewish life and Southern Jewish history. So, I mean, how many museums can you say, yeah, there's something of mine in that museum? So we want people to, write us a check, obviously, but we also want them to be in the museum themselves. And so the Mezzah Society is an opportunity for that. So I'm excited to see how that comes about. We're already getting mezuzahs being mailed to us from members of the Mezzah Society. I'm going to end by inviting you to subscribe to our newsletter. It's called the Southern Schmooze, and it talks about the progress of the museum. It lists our public programming. We're doing a great program next week on the Jewish Orphans Home here in New Orleans. And so if you go to msje.org/contact, you can sign up for our newsletter. And finally is my email address, kenneth@msje.org. If you want to share ideas with me, or your story, or if you want to donate an artifact, and you're not sure if it's something we might be interested in, send me an email, and we'll start that conversation. So I have now been rambling on, so I'm going to stop rambling on and I'm going to ask Alex if anyone has any questions, or even if anyone's still out there.
People are definitely still out there, but there have been no questions. So
I
if
put them to
anyone has
sleep.
they fell asleep. No, I actually was Googling things as you were speaking, because there were some things that you brought up that were interesting to me. I wanted to learn a little more about. But no, there have been no questions, but last call for questions for those who are watching and are awake. Again, people do sometimes ask later on, so
Sure, either email me directly, or you can email Alex and ask a question, and she'll pass it on to me. And
what I was going to say. Hopefully we can come to visit the museum next year. Things will, be looking up. Maybe we'll come for Mardi Gras. We'll take a trip.
Yeah.
Crew, did you? No.
Don't come for Mardi Gras.
Okay. Well, I saw you're down the street from the Southern Food and Beverage Museum.
Yes.
So that would be a fun thing to do also.
That is.
Maybe.
That is.
Well, thank you so much, Kenneth. I'm just checking one more time. Yeah, last call for questions. There are none. So I will email you if there are any. If anyone has questions later on, email me, email Kenneth. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's really interesting, and I hope we can meet you in person soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
You too. Thank you. Bye. End the stream.